Commander Jake Morrison sat in the captain's chair of the exploration vessel Endeavour as it drifted through the darkness beyond Neptune's orbit. The ship had been on a routine survey mission when the sensors picked up something that made every person on the bridge freeze in place. A massive vessel had appeared from nowhere, and it was unlike anything humanity had ever built or imagined. The ship was enormous and seemed to shimmer with colors that human eyes struggled to process properly. Lisa. Harper stood next to Jake, and her hands gripped the edge of the console as she stared at the view screen. She had been Earth's top diplomat for 15 years, but nothing in her career had prepared her for this moment. First contact with an alien species was supposed to be humanity's greatest achievement, but the cold feeling in her stomach told her this might not go the way anyone had hoped. The communication officer looked up from his station with wide eyes and announced that they were receiving a transmission on multiple frequencies. Jake nodded and told him to put it through. The main screen flickered and then displayed a being that made several crew members gasp audibly. It stood nearly 8 feet tall with a body that resembled a massive insect but walked upright like a human. Its 4 eyes glowed with an orange light and its mandibles clicked as it began to speak. The translator built into the Endeavour's system struggled for a moment before the alien's words became clear. The being introduced itself as Ambassador Thalzar of the Galactic Council and explained that humanity had been discovered and assessed according to protocols that had been in place for over 10,000 years. Jake glanced at Lisa and saw his own surprise reflected in her expression. 10,000 years meant this council had been out here long before humans had even built their first cities. Thalzar continued speaking in a tone that suggested he had delivered this speech countless times before. He explained that the Galactic Council was composed of 47 different species and governed all known intelligent life in the galaxy. Humanity was now required to follow standard integration procedures which would ensure a peaceful transition into the greater galactic community. The words sounded reasonable enough, but there was something about the way the Thalzar spoke that made Jake's military instincts flare up. The ambassador then outlined what he called the integration requirements. Humanity must immediately surrender all military vessels and weapons to Council authority. All space-based assets, including satellites and stations, must be placed under Council control. Earth's governments must dissolve and accept Council governance during a probationary period of 500 years. Humanity would be assigned a position in the lower castes of galactic society until they proved themselves worthy of higher status. The bridge was silent for a long moment. Jake felt something bubble up inside him, and before he could stop it, he started laughing. It wasn't a nervous laugh or a quiet chuckle, but a genuine, full-throated laugh that echoed through the bridge. Lisa looked at him like he had lost his mind, but then her lips twitched and she started laughing too. Within seconds, half the bridge crew was laughing, and even the ones who weren't had grins on their faces. Thalzar's mandibles stopped clicking, and his eyes seemed to dim slightly. He appeared genuinely confused by the human reaction. Jake managed to control himself long enough to speak, and he wiped tears from his eyes as he did. He thanked the ambassador for the generous offer, but politely declined on behalf of all humanity. Lisa stepped forward and added that perhaps the Council should review Earth's history before making such demands again. She suggested they pay particular attention to what happened whenever someone told humans they had to surrender. The ambassador's confusion turned to something. It might have been anger, or perhaps disbelief. He stated that no species in Council history had ever refused integration. The protocols had been followed perfectly for thousands of years, and every discovered species had understood the wisdom of accepting Council guidance. Humanity was making a grave mistake that would only lead to unnecessary conflict and suffering. Jake leaned forward in his chair, and his voice took on the tone he had used during his years commanding ships in Earth's naval forces. He explained that humans had a saying about those who didn't learn from history being doomed to repeat it. He suggested that the Council might want to learn some human history before pushing this matter further. Lisa added that Earth would be happy to establish diplomatic relations as equals, but submission was simply not on the table. Thalzar was silent for several seconds before announcing that humanity would be given 30 days to reconsider their position. If they did not comply by then, the Council would be forced to take military action. The transmission ended abruptly, and the alien vessel vanished as quickly as it had appeared. The Endeavor's crew erupted into nervous chatter, but Jake immediately ordered them to begin recording every detail of the encounter. Lisa was already on the communication system, sending an encrypted message back to Earth. Within hours, every government on the planet would know that humanity was no longer alone in the universe and that their new neighbors had started the relationship. With a demand for surrender, back on Earth President Ben Carter sat in the Situation Room. Deep beneath the White House, the message from the Endeavor had arrived 2 hours ago, and he had immediately assembled his top military and scientific advisors. General Ryan Walsh stood near. It's a large display screen showing everything humanity had managed to learn about the Council from that brief encounter. Science Director Amy Chen was reviewing the data on the alien vessel's capabilities, and what she found both amazed and worried her. The room fell silent as President Carter asked for opinions. General Walsh spoke first and pointed out that humanity had been preparing for this scenario in one form or another for over a century. Every science fiction writer and military strategist had imagined hostile first contact, and dozens of contingency plans existed. The question was whether those plans would be worth anything. Against a civilization that had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years, Amy looked up from her tablet and shared something interesting. The Council's vessel had incredibly advanced faster than light engines and sensors that were far beyond anything humans had developed. However, their weapons and defensive systems seemed surprisingly basic. It was like they had focused all their development on peaceful technologies and treated military hardware as an afterthought. That suggested a civilization that hadn't fought a real war in a very long time. President Carter absorbed this information and made his decision. He ordered the immediate activation of Defense Protocol 7, which had been designed for exactly this situation. Every military installation on Earth and throughout the solar system would go to alert status. The shipyards orbiting Earth and Mars would begin accelerating production. Most importantly, humanity would not surrender, but they would also make every effort to find a diplomatic solution. Lisa Harper returned to Earth 3 days later and went straight to the United Nations building. She stood before representatives of every nation and delivered a speech that would be remembered for generations. She explained that humanity faced a choice between freedom and submission. The easy path would be to accept counsel, rule, and hope for the best. The hard path meant standing firm and risking everything for the right to determine their own future. The vote was unanimous. Humanity would not surrender. The council chamber on the station orbiting the planet. Velar Prime was a massive structure that could hold representatives from all 47 member species. Today it was filled beyond capacity as delegates crowded in to witness. The emergency session called to discuss the human problem. Council leader Vartok stood at the center podium, and his scaled body reflected the harsh lights as he addressed the assembly. He was ancient even by council standards, and had led them for nearly 3 centuries. Vartok explained that in all his years of service, he had never encountered a species that refused integration. The protocols had been refined over thousands of years, and had always worked perfectly. A show of overwhelming force combined with reasonable terms had convinced every species to accept council guidance. Humanity's refusal was not just unexpected but dangerous because it could inspire other species to question council authority. Military. Commander Zephyr approached the podium. Next, and his crystalline form sparkled as he moved. He brought up holographic displays showing everything the council had learned about. Earth, the planet was small and orbited an unremarkable yellow star. Its dominant species had only achieved faster than light travel within the last decade. Their energy consumption was moderate, and their technology seemed primitive by council standards. By every metric the council used, humanity should be classified as a level 2 civilization, which was barely worth noticing. Several delegates murmured their agreement, and one asked why the council was even bothering with such a primitive species. Zephyr's response made the chamber fall silent. He explained that preliminary scans of Earth's solar system had revealed something unexpected. The humans had military installations on their moon, and on Mars, They had defense satellites around their planet numbering in the thousands. Their industrial capacity was enormous and seemed focused primarily on manufacturing weapons and military equipment. This was unusual because most species at their development level focused on peaceful expansion and trade. Ambassador Thalzar spoke up from his position near the back of the chamber. He had personally met with the humans and could provide insight into their psychology. He explained that when he delivered the integration requirements, the humans had laughed. Not nervous laughter or confused laughter, but genuine amusement, as if the idea of surrendering was absurd. Their commander had even suggested the council study human history before making threats. Vartok dismissed this with a wave of his clawed hand. He stated that humanity's confidence was meaningless in the face of council power. They would learn their place soon enough. He ordered Zephyr to prepare a standard enforcement fleet of 200 ships and proceed to Earth's solar system. The deadline would stand, and when it expired, the fleet would demonstrate what happened to species that refused council wisdom. Light. Years away on Earth, Captain Matt Spencer sat in the command center of Luna Station and watched his screens carefully. The station was hidden on the dark side of Earth's moon and served as the primary coordination point for humanity's defense network. Over the past week, his sensors had detected multiple council scout ships probing the edges of the solar system. They were being careful, but not careful enough to avoid detection by the sensor web humanity had been building for decades. Matt ordered his operators to maintain passive tracking only. Every council ship that entered the solar system was monitored, but not engaged. The data they were gathering was invaluable because it showed how council ships moved and what their scanning patterns looked like. The scouts seemed to be looking for military installations and fleet positions, but they clearly didn't understand how humans approached warfare. They were looking for large, obvious targets, while humanity's strength lay in distributed systems and redundancy. Dr. Kate Sullivan stood in her laboratory deep beneath the surface of Earth and studied the biological data that had been collected from Ambassador Thalzar's ship. Even a simple communication transmission carried trace particles and radiation that could be analyzed. What she found fascinated her because it revealed something fundamental about the council species. She immediately requested a meeting with the Defense Committee, and within hours was presenting her findings to some of the most powerful people on Earth. Kate explained that every council species they had encountered so far showed similar evolutionary patterns. They had all evolved on worlds with relatively gentle conditions and minimal predation. Their development had been gradual and peaceful, with competition for resources being resolved through cooperation rather than conflict. This had shaped their entire approach to civilization and made them fundamentally different from humanity. Earth had been a harsh world where humans competed with apex predators and each other for survival. This created a species that was aggressive and adaptable and creative in ways the council couldn't understand. General Walsh leaned forward and asked what this meant in practical terms. Kate's answer was simple but profound. The council had never really fought a war because they had never needed to. Their military was more like a police force designed to maintain order rather than defeat peer competitors. Their ships and weapons were built to intimidate primitive species, not to fight against someone who actually knew how to wage war. Humanity, on the other hand, had been perfecting the art of killing each other for thousands of years and had only recently turned that expertise toward preparing for alien threats. Ambassador Thalzar returned to Earth 1 week before the deadline expired. He came in a small diplomatic vessel with minimal security because he genuinely believed humans would see reason once they understood the consequences of defiance. Lisa Harper met him at the landing site outside Geneva and escorted him to the United Nations building. She had arranged for him to tour several human cities and meet with various leaders in hopes that dialogue might prevent bloodshed. The tour did not go as Thalzar expected. In Geneva, he saw factories that produced warships and weapons at a staggering rate. In Beijing, he witnessed military drills where millions of soldiers trained with equipment that seemed surprisingly advanced. In Washington, he met with President Carter, who calmly explained that humanity had been preparing for hostile first contact since the mid-20th century. Every science fiction story and every war game had imagined this scenario in humanity. had plans within plans for dealing with it. What disturbed Thelsar most was the attitude of the humans themselves. They were not afraid of the council or the coming deadline. If anything, they seemed almost eager for the confrontation, as if they had been waiting their entire lives for a worthy challenge. He saw civilians practicing emergency drills and children playing games where they pretended to fight alien invaders. The entire species seemed to have embraced the coming conflict rather than dreading it. The final negotiation session took place in a secure conference room with Lisa and President Carter representing humanity. The Tsar made one last appeal for reason and explained that council enforcement fleets had never failed to achieve compliance. He showed them holographic records of previous integrations, where species had initially resisted but quickly surrendered once they saw council military power. He genuinely believed he was trying to save humanity from destruction. Lisa listened patiently and then shared something that made Thalzar's mandibles click nervously. She brought up humanity's own records and showed him conflicts from Earth's history. She showed him the world wars where millions died, but neither side surrendered. She showed him small nations that had resisted empires for generations, despite overwhelming odds. She showed him the countless times humans had chosen death over submission because they valued freedom more than survival. President Carter added that humanity appreciated the Council's concern, but the answer remained no. Earth would not surrender its sovereignty and would not accept inferior status in some galactic hierarchy. He proposed an alternative where humanity joined the Council as an equal partner with full voting rights and autonomy. If the Council could accept those terms, then perhaps war could be avoided. Thalzar slowly rose from his seat, and his body language conveyed defeat. He stated that the Council would never accept such terms from a newly discovered species. The hierarchy existed for good reasons and could not be disrupted. He warned that the enforcement fleet would arrive in 3 days, and humanity would face the consequences of their choice. As his ship lifted off from Earth, Lisa and President Carter watched from the observation deck, and both knew that the galaxy was about to learn something important about humanity. The Council had ruled through intimidation for 10,000 years, but they had never encountered a species that simply refused to be intimidated. The Council enforcement fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of Earth's solar system exactly as the deadline expired. 200 warships arranged themselves in a formation that had been used successfully for thousands of years. Fleet Commander Zephyr stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the tactical displays with confidence. His crystalline body pulsed with satisfaction, because this would be a quick operation that would restore order and remind the galaxy why the Council's word was law. Admiral Chris Bennett watched from Luna station as the Council fleet appeared on his sensors. He had been preparing for this moment since the first contact. Every ship in humanity's defense force was positioned exactly where it needed to be. His fleet numbered only 85 ships, which seemed hopelessly outnumbered, but Chris knew something the Council didn't. Humanity had never fought a fair fight when they could avoid it, and they weren't about to start now. The fleet was scattered throughout the solar system, rather than grouped in one location. Some ships hid in the asteroid belt, while others used the gravity wells of planets to mask their signatures. This was not how the Council expected military forces to deploy, and their sensors struggled to get accurate counts. Zephyr found this concerning, but assumed it was simply primitive tactics from a species that didn't understand proper fleet operations. Chris gave the order to broadcast humanity's final response. The message went out on all frequencies and reached both the Council fleet and every settlement in the solar system. President Carter's voice was calm and measured as he explained that humanity had hoped for peace, but was prepared for war. He stated that any attack on Earth or its colonies would be met with full retaliation, and that humanity would never surrender regardless of the cost. The message ended with a simple statement that the Council should turn back while they still could. Zeph Yer considered this message to be exactly what he expected. From a primitive species that didn't understand its situation, he ordered the fleet to advance to weapons range and prepare to fire warning shots that would disable Earth satellites and communications. This was standard procedure and usually resulted in immediate surrender once the target species realized how outmatched they were. His weapons officers charged the plasma cannons and prepared to demonstrate Council superiority. The Council fleet fired first, and dozens of bright plasma bolts streaked toward E.A. Ruth's orbital infrastructure. The weapons were designed to disable rather than destroy, because the Council preferred to integrate species intact. What happened next shocked every member of Zephyr's crew. Earth's defensive grid activated and hundreds of point defense systems began firing. The plasma bolts were intercepted by missiles and energy weapons, and not a single shot reached its target. Then the human counterattack began. Chris had divided his forces into 3 groups, and now all 3 sprang their trap. The first group emerged from behind the moon and fired a massive volley of missiles. These were not energy weapons like the Council used, but old-fashioned kinetic projectiles moving at incredible speeds. The Council's shields were designed to deflect plasma and lasers, but solid objects moving at relativistic speeds punched through them like paper. 12 Council ships disappeared in the first 30 seconds of combat. The second group came from the asteroid belt, led by Captain Cole Grant, aboard the destroyer Valiant. Her ships had been hiding among the rocks, and now they used the asteroids as cover while launching hit-and-run attacks. The Council ships tried to target them, but found their weapons couldn't track fast enough. Nicole's tactical display showed her exactly where to strike, and her crew executed the maneuvers perfectly. They would appear and fire and disappear back into the belt before the Council could respond. The third group was perhaps the most unusual because they didn't fire conventional weapons at all. These ships broadcast on all Council frequencies and filled the communication channels with sounds that made no sense to alien ears. It was human music, and specifically the loudest and most aggressive music humanity had ever created. The heavy metal and rock music wasn't just annoying, but actually interfered with Council communication systems because they had never designed their networks to filter out such noise. Zephyr's careful formation broke apart as his ships tried to respond to threats from multiple directions. His crews were trained and professional, but they had never faced combat like this. Every simulation and every historical record showed enemies that formed neat battle lines and exchanged fire in organized ways. The humans fought like the primitive predators they were, and used every dirty trick imaginable. They hid behind asteroids and launched ambushes. They used their moon's gravity to slingshot missiles at impossible angles. They even weaponized sound to disrupt communications. The battle raged for 4 hours, and the space around Earth became filled with debris from destroyed ships. The Council lost 47 vessels, and dozens more were damaged. Humanity lost 12 ships, and each loss was mourned by the crews still fighting. But those 12 ships took over 30 Council vessels with them because human ships were designed with a final option. If a ship was crippled and couldn't escape, the crew could set it on a collision course and evacuate in escape pods. The Council had never encountered kamikaze tactics and didn't know how to counter them. The turning point came when Nicole led her group in a daring strike against Zephyr's flagship. Her ships came out of the asteroid belt at full speed and launched everything they had. The flagship's shields held against the first wave, but the second wave included something special. Humanity had developed electromagnetic pulse weapons decades ago for use against their own electronics. These weapons proved devastatingly effective against Council systems which had never been hardened. Against such attacks, the flagship went dark as its systems overloaded and died. Zephyr found himself drifting in space aboard a ship that had become a metal coffin. His crew worked frantically to restore emergency power, but nothing responded. Then human boarding craft attached to the hull, and soldiers in armored suits cut their way inside. The fleet commander of the Galactic Council was captured along with his entire bridge, crew, and command frigate. The remaining Council ships broke formation and began retreating when they realized their commander had been taken. Chris ordered his forces to let them go rather than pursuing. He wanted some Council ships to survive, so they could report what had happened. The message needed to be clear that humanity could not be intimidated or conquered easily, Admiral. Chris Bennett surveyed the battlefield from his command center and felt a mixture of pride and sorrow. Humanity had won its first engagement against an alien power, but the cost had been real. 12 ships and nearly 3,000 people had died defending their home. He ordered recovery operations to begin immediately and made sure every escape pod was retrieved. The Council survivors would be treated according to human rules of war, which meant they would be kept safe and healthy. Zeph. Ea was brought to Luna Station under guard and placed in a secured facility designed to hold prisoners. He sat in his cell and tried to process what had happened. His fleet had been defeated by a species that barely had faster-than-light travel. His flagship had been captured by soldiers using tactics that seemed barbaric. Everything he knew about warfare and Council superiority had been proven wrong in just 4 hours. Lieutenant Sam Rodriguez entered the cell accompanied by intelligence. Officer Beth Palmer? They carried portable computers and recording equipment because they had many questions for their prisoner. Sam explained that Zephyr would be treated well according to human conventions, but cooperation would make things easier. Beth added that they wanted to understand the Council and find a way to end this conflict peacefully. The interrogation lasted for days and revealed information that changed humanity's understanding of the galaxy. Zephyr explained that the Council military was not really a military force at all. It was a peacekeeping organization that maintained order among species that had already accepted Council authority. The last real war the Council fought had been over 3,000 years ago against a species that had since gone extinct. Every conflict since then had been one-sided. Affairs were overwhelming. Force convinced primitive species to surrender. Immediately, Dr. Kate Sullivan analyzed the data from the captured Council ships and found exactly what she expected. The technology was impressive in many ways, with faster-than-light drives that were far superior to human designs. Their sensors could detect objects across vast distances, and their power generation was incredibly efficient. But their weapons were basic plasma cannons that hadn't been upgraded in centuries. Their shields were designed to stop energy weapons, but not kinetic projectiles. Their ships had almost no armor, because they had never needed it. The intelligence painted a clear picture of a civilization that had grown complacent. The Council had ruled for so long without challenge that they had forgotten how to actually fight. They had technological advantages, but lacked the tactical creativity and aggressive mindset that came from constant competition. Humanity had spent its entire existence fighting wars, and that experience now gave them an edge that technology alone couldn't overcome. News of the Council defeat spread through the galaxy faster than anyone expected. Several younger species that had been integrated into the Council centuries ago began asking questions. If humanity could resist, then perhaps others could too. The Council faced something they had not dealt with in thousands of years, which was the possibility that their authority might not be absolute after all. The Council chamber erupted into chaos. As news of the fleet's defeat reached the assembled delegates, Vartok stood at the center podium, and his scaled body trembled with rage as he demanded order. Never in 10,000 years had a Council enforcement action failed, and the implications were staggering. Several delegates were already calling for their species to reconsider their membership, while others demanded immediate retaliation against humanity. Ambassador Krelvin of the Luminary species requested permission to speak, and his glowing form cast soft light across the chamber. He was old even by Luminary standards, and had served on the Council longer than most current delegates had been alive. His voice carried weight, and the chamber gradually fell silent as he began to speak. He stated that perhaps the Council had made a mistake in how they approached humanity, and that force had clearly not worked. He suggested opening genuine diplomatic channels and treating the humans as equals, rather than subjects to be conquered. Vartek rejected this immediately and called it weakness. He argued that if the Council showed any compromise now, then every species in the galaxy would begin questioning their authority. The Council's power had always rested on the perception that resistance was futile, and one defeat could not be allowed to undermine thousands of years of established order. He proposed assembling the Grand Armada, which had not been used in 5,000 years. This force would combine ships from all 47 member species and would number over 2,000 vessels. No species had ever withstood such overwhelming power. The vote was called, and the chamber divided almost evenly. 24 species voted to assemble the Armada, while 23 voted against it. The deciding vote fell to Vartak as council leader, and he chose war. He gave humanity 60 days to surrender unconditionally or face total destruction. This time there would be no negotiation and no mercy. The council would make an example of humanity that would be remembered for the next 10,000 years. Back on Earth, President Carter convened an emergency meeting of the Global Defense Council. Representatives from every nation gathered in the sea, Almond Center deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. Admiral Bennett presented his analysis of the recent battle and explained both the good news and the bad news. The good news was that human tactics and weapons had proven effective against Council technology. The bad news was that the Council had barely committed any real resources, and the next attack would be far more serious. Dr. Kate Sullivan shared her findings from studying the captured Council vessels, and the results were both exciting and terrifying. Her team had successfully reverse-engineered the faster-than-light drives and could now build human ships with Council-level speed. This meant humanity could potentially match the Council's mobility, which had been their greatest advantage. However, the sheer number of ships the Council could bring to bear remained overwhelming in quantity, had a quality all its own. Governor Tyler Brooks appeared on the screen from Mars Colony and reported that his shipyards were working at maximum capacity. The independent colonies throughout the solar system had united completely behind Earth and were contributing every resource they could spare. Europa Station had begun producing new ship designs that combined human weapons with Council propulsion systems. The asteroid mining operations were providing raw materials faster than the factories could process them. Commander Hannah White joined the meeting from Europa Station and presented something that made everyone in the room sit up straight. Her engineers had not only copied the Council faster-than-light drives, but had improved them by integrating human computer systems and control. The new hybrid drives were actually faster and more efficient than the originals. She explained that the Council had optimized their technology for reliability and ease of use, but humans had optimized for performance and combat effectiveness. The results spoke for themselves. President Carter listened to all the reports and then made his decision. Earth would not wait passively for the Council to attack again. Humanity would take the initiative and send scout ships to explore Council space and gather intelligence. They would also reach out to other species in the galaxy and see if any might be willing to stand with them. The 60-day deadline gave them time to prepare, and they would use every second of it. Lieutenant Sam Rodriguez continued his interrogations of Fleet Commander Zephyr and gradually built a comprehensive picture of Council society. The Council controlled hundreds of star systems and trillions of beings, but their control was based more on habit than actual force. Most member species had been integrated so long ago that they didn't remember independence. The younger species had never known anything except Council rule. The entire system was held together by the belief that the Council was invincible and permanent. Beth Palmer took this information and began developing a strategy that went beyond simple military victory. She proposed that humanity's real goal should not be defeating the Council, but breaking the illusion of their invincibility. If other species saw that the Council could be resisted, then the entire power structure might collapse from within. This meant that every battle needed to be as public as possible, and every human victory needed to be broadcast across the galaxy, independent. Human vessels began appearing in Council space. Within 2 weeks of the first battle, these were small, fast ships equipped with the new hybrid drives and advanced stealth technology. They avoided Council patrols and made contact with various species that seemed dissatisfied with their status. Captain Dan Harper led one of these missions aboard a modified scout ship, and what he discovered changed everything. Don made contact with the Varani, people who occupied 3 systems near the galactic rim. They had been integrated into the Council 800 years ago and still remembered their independence. The current Varani leadership had maintained secret military forces that the Council didn't know about because they hoped someday to reclaim their freedom. When Dan showed them footage of human ships defeating Council vessels, the Varani, leaders were amazed and intrigued. Similar stories emerged from other scout missions across Council space. The Korthon had advanced manufacturing capabilities but were restricted to producing civilian goods. The Thelas had brilliant scientists who were forced to work on council-approved projects rather than their own research. The Milani had a warrior culture that had been suppressed for generations. All of these species and more were quietly unhappy with council rule, but had never imagined resistance was possible. Dr. Laura Hayes worked around the clock analyzing council technology and looking for weaknesses. She discovered that all council ships use the same basic computer architecture and communication protocols. This standardization made their fleets easy to coordinate, but also created a massive vulnerability. If humanity could develop a virus or electronic warfare system that exploited these common systems, then they could potentially disable large numbers of council ships simultaneously. Her team began developing what they called the Cascade Protocol, which was designed to spread through council networks and temporarily disable ships without destroying them. The idea was to create confusion and give human forces a tactical advantage without necessarily killing the enemy crews. This aligned with humanity's rules of war, which preferred capturing or disabling enemy forces rather than destroying them when possible. The Council continued assembling the Grand Armada, but the process was slower than Vartok had hoped. Several member species dragged their feet on contributing ships and crews. Some claimed maintenance issues, while others cited resource shortages. The truth was that many species were having second thoughts about attacking humanity. The footage of the first battle had spread through unofficial channels and showed humans fighting with courage and skill that challenged the council narrative about primitive species. Ambassador Krelvin worked behind the scenes to build support for a peaceful resolution. He reached out to moderate delegates from various species and argued that the council was making a terrible mistake. He pointed out that even if they defeated humanity, the cost would be enormous, and the damage to council unity might be irreparable. Several species were already questioning whether they wanted to participate in what was starting to look like a war of conquest, rather than a peacekeeping operation. President Carter addressed the people of Earth in a broadcast that was also transmitted to every human colony and secretly beamed to sympathetic species across the galaxy. He explained that humanity stood at a crossroads in history. They could surrender and accept subjugation, or they could fight for their freedom knowing the cost would be high. He stated his belief that freedom was worth any price, and that humanity would rather die free than live in chains. The speech was simple and direct, but it resonated with people across the galaxy who had forgotten what it had meant to be truly free. The 60 days passed quickly as both sides prepared for the coming confrontation. Humanity produced 300 new warships using the hybrid technology and trained crews that were eager to prove themselves. The Council assembled nearly 2,000 vessels from across their territory, but the fleet lacked the cohesion and unity of purpose that military forces needed. Some crews were loyal to the Council, while others were there only because they had no choice. The stage was set for a battle that would determine not just humanity's fate, but the future of the entire galaxy. Vartok believed he was about to crush a rebellion and restore order. President Carter knew he was fighting for something far more important than one planet or one species. He was fighting for the principle that intelligent beings had the right to determine their own destiny. The Grand Armada began its journey toward Earth, and humanity prepared to meet them with everything they had. The Grand Armada emerged from faster than light travel at the edge of Earth's solar system, and the sight was overwhelming. Nearly 2,000 warships from 47 different species ranged themselves in a formation that stretched across millions of kilometers of space. Vartok stood aboard his command vessel and felt certain that this display of power would finally break human resistance. No species in galactic history had ever witnessed such force and survived to tell about it. Admiral Chris Bennett watched the massive fleet appear on his tactical displays and felt his stomach tighten. Humanity had prepared as best they could, but the numbers were still terrifying. His fleet had grown to 300 ships, but they were still outnumbered more than 6 to 1. However, Chris had learned long ago that wars were not won by numbers alone. They were won by courage and strategy and the willingness to do whatever was necessary to protect what mattered most. The human fleet was positioned throughout the solar system in a defensive formation that had been practiced hundreds of times. Captain Dan Harper commanded the flagship Unity from a position near Mars, while other battle groups covered Earth and the outer colonies. Every ship was equipped with the new hybrid drives that combined Council speed with human weapons systems. Dr. Laura Hayes had uploaded the Cascade protocol to every vessel, and it was ready to deploy on Admiral Bennett's command. What the Council did not know was that humanity was not alone. Hidden among the asteroid belt and behind the moons of Jupiter were ships from 12 other species that had secretly joined the human cause. The Varani had sent 30 warships. The Korthon had contributed advanced manufacturing ships that could repair damaged vessels during battle. The Thelis had provided scientific support, and the Milani had sent warriors eager to fight alongside humans. These allies remained hidden and would reveal themselves only when the moment was right. Vought transmitted his final ultimatum to Earth. He stated that humanity had one last chance to surrender and accept Council authority. If they refused, then the Armada would destroy every human installation in the solar system and reduce Earth to a primitive state. The message was meant to terrify, but President Carter's response showed no fear. He simply stated that humanity's answer remained the same and that the Council should turn back while they still could. The Council leader gave the order to attack, and the Armada began moving forward. Hundreds of ships advanced in a coordinated wave that was designed to overwhelm any defense. Their plasma cannons charged and their shields activated as they prepared to demonstrate the full power of galactic civilization. Vartok expected humanity to break and scatter within the first few minutes. Instead, the human fleet held position and waited until the Council ships entered optimal range. Then Admiral Bennett gave the order and 300 human vessels opened fire simultaneously. The barrage was devastating because every weapon had been designed specifically to counter Council technology. Kinetic missiles punched through energy shields while electromagnetic pulse weapons disabled ship systems. Nuclear warheads detonated in carefully calculated patterns that created zones of destruction. The Council's front line disintegrated under the assault. Dr. Hayes activated the Cascade protocol and watched as it spread through the Council fleet's communication network. The virus was elegant and targeted only military systems while leaving life support intact. Within minutes, over 300 Council ships found their weapons and engines disabled. They drifted helplessly in space while their crews worked frantically to restore control. The Council had never faced electronic warfare on this scale, and their standardized systems made them incredibly vulnerable. Captain Nicole Grant led her strike group in a daring attack on the Council's left flank. Her ships moved with incredible speed, using the hybrid drives to dance around enemy fire. They employed the same hit-and-run tactics that had worked in the first battle, but now they had better ships and more experience. The Council tried to counter, but their formations were designed for overwhelming force, not tactical flexibility. They simply could not adapt fast enough to human maneuvers. The battle raged for hours in the space. Around Earth became a chaotic mess of ships and weapons fire. The Council had numbers, but humanity had initiative and better tactics. Every human captain knew their role and executed their part of the plan with precision. They used the gravity wells of planets to slingshot missiles at impossible angles. They hid behind asteroids and launched ambushes. They coordinated their attacks in ways that maximized damage while minimizing their own losses. Then something happened that changed everything. A dozen Council species suddenly withdrew their ships from the Armada and refused to continue fighting. The Varani revealed their hidden forces and joined the battle on humanity's side. The Korthon manufacturing ships began broadcasting messages across all frequencies explaining why they had chosen to stand with Earth. The Milani warriors attacked Council vessels with a ferocity that shocked even the humans. The unified Armada fractured into competing factions right in the middle of battle. Vartok watched in horror as his carefully assembled force fell apart. Species that had followed Council orders for centuries were suddenly defying him. Ships were retreating without permission, while others were actively joining the enemy. His own crew looked uncertain, and he could feel their doubt. The illusion of Council invincibility was shattering. Before his eyes, and there was nothing he could do to stop it, Ambassador Krelvin transmitted a message on emergency channels calling for an immediate ceasefire. His voice carried authority that came from centuries of respected service, and many ships stopped firing when they heard his words. He proposed emergency negotiations to take place at a neutral location and stated that continuing the battle would only lead to more senseless death. Several council captains responded positively and began withdrawing their vessels from combat range. Admiral Bennett ordered his forces to hold fire but maintain defensive positions. He would not attack ships that were retreating, but neither would he let his guard down. The battle slowly wound down as more and more council vessels either withdrew or simply stopped fighting. 3 days of intense combat ended with the council fleet scattered and demoralized, while humanity and its allies maintained control of Earth's solar system. The negotiations took place at Jupiter, a station which had been hastily converted into a neutral meeting ground. Ambassador Krelvin led the council delegation while President Carter and Admiral Bennett represented humanity. Representatives from the 12 species that had joined humanity also attended, along with delegates from several other species that had remained neutral during the battle. The chamber was crowded with beings from across the galaxy, all trying to determine what came next. Commander Emma Davis and Diplomatic Chief Megan Torres worked tirelessly to facilitate the discussions. The challenge was enormous, because they were not just negotiating peace, but potentially restructuring the entire galactic order. Many species wanted reform while others clung to the old ways. Humanity's position was clear, and they would accept nothing less than full equality and the right to self-determination for all species. The negotiations lasted for weeks, and there were moments when it seemed everything would collapse back into war. Vardic and his faction refused any compromise and argued that the Council's authority must be maintained. However, Krelvin and the moderate faction had the support of more species, and they pushed for fundamental change. The younger species that had been subjugated for centuries saw this as their chance for freedom and would not accept a return to the old order. The breakthrough came when the Varani proposed dissolving the Council entirely and creating a new Galactic Assembly, where every species would have equal representation. The idea was radical, but it gained support quickly. Species that had been second-class citizens for millennia suddenly saw hope for genuine equality. Even some of the older Council species admitted privately that the current system had grown corrupt and stagnant. The final agreement was revolutionary. The Galactic Council was dissolved and replaced by the Galactic Assembly, with a constitution based partly on human democratic principles and partly on traditional galactic governance. Every member species received equal voting rights and the ability to maintain their own military forces. A collective defense pact was established to protect against external threats. But no species could be forced into military action against their will. Most importantly, all species, regardless of age or technological development, were guaranteed fundamental rights and freedoms. Humanity was granted full membership in the new assembly, along with the 12 species that had fought beside them. 3 other species that had been subjugated by the Council were also granted independence and membership. Vartok resigned in disgrace, and the faction that had supported continuing the war found itself isolated and powerless. A new era of galactic cooperation began based on mutual respect rather than fear and domination. 5 years passed, and the changes to galactic civilization were profound. Trade flourished between species that had barely interacted under Council rule. Scientific cooperation led to advances that benefited everyone. The military forces of various species began training together and sharing technology. Humanity contributed their tactical expertise, while other species shared their advanced sciences. The galaxy was entering a golden age of progress and exploration. Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of the exploration vessel, Horizon, and looked out at the stars. He had been promoted after the war and now commanded a joint fleet of human and alien vessels tasked with exploring the unknown regions beyond Council space. The ship behind him was a marvel of cooperative engineering built by teams from 8 different species working together. It combined the best technology and ideas from across the galaxy. Jake thought about how far humanity had come in just a few years. They had gone from being threatened with subjugation to becoming respected members of galactic civilization. The cost had been real, with thousands of humans dying in the war and thousands more working tirelessly to build the peace. But the result was worth it, because humanity had not just secured their own freedom, but had helped free countless others. Horizon's engines powered up and the ship prepared to jump to faster than light speed. Jake's crew was diverse, with humans working alongside Varani and Thelas and Milani and species from across the galaxy. They were heading toward unexplored space, where new worlds and new challenges awaited. As the ship jumped forward into the unknown, Jake smiled, because this was what humanity had always been meant for. Not to dominate or to submit, but to explore and to stand as equals. Among the stars, the galaxy would never underestimate humanity again, but more importantly, humanity had shown everyone that freedom was worth fighting for, and that even the oldest and most powerful systems could be changed if enough beings stood together in demon.